so good to see y'all here this morning. Happy Easter. How you doing? It is so glad to have y'all here today. Man, we are excited. I have a question for you. Have you ever been looking for something and it was right there in front of you the whole time? Have you ever been one of those? My wife tells me, Dan, it is right there in front of you. The whole time it's been right there in front of you. Have you ever done this? Now, I got my sweet tea here this morning. If you're a sweet tea kind of person in here, okay. It's actually the fake kind of sweet tea, 0 calorie if you're that kind of guy. I know I am. But anyway, have you ever said, if you're a man in the room and you said, "Baby, where's the milk? Where's the sweet tea? I just bought some." And you got the fridge wide open. Have you ever done this thing where you got the fridge wide open and you've got the fridge stance? Do you know what the fridge stance is? Oh yes, we got some men in here who definitely know what the fridge stance. Here's the fridge stance, okay? It's where you come down, you get down kind of like this, yeah, and you're looking, deep into the fridge. Wait, baby, where is it? Where is it? And she'll look back and she goes, "It's right there in front of you," okay? There's been other times it happens with my kids. Here, I'll put my sweet tea down here. All right. And other times this happens with my kids. Happens all the time. If you've got kids, we got to go out the door. We got places to be. Maybe they're on their way to school. I know the parents in here, if you're getting your kids ready on the way to school, and it always seems to be, brush your teeth, brush your hair, kind of that last thing, and put your shoes on. Have you ever been there? Get your shoes on. And the question always comes over the house, where are they? There is nothing that just makes my soul sink when I hear, where are they? Because I don't know, And so you're looking around and you start in the bathroom because the bathroom is the last place they took them off because they took a bath at night. And then you go into the laundry room and then you go into the living room because maybe they took them off to watch some TV. And then you walk right into their bedroom and there they are sitting on the floor of their bedroom. Something was right in front of them, but they couldn't see it. Now I'll tell you a situation. Can I just be vulnerable with y'all this morning? I had a situation happen a couple years ago. I'm not real proud of it, okay? So I'm going to share it with you today. There was one time that I was getting ready to leave the house. And when I leave the house, I do this whole thing. Do you have different pockets? Do you store things in different pockets? You say, you have the pocket for the phone, and it does not go from one pocket to the other. You have a pocket for the keys. You ladies, y'all are so easy. You got the purse. Everything goes in there, lamps, kitchen sink, keys, medication, whatever you need. Y'all got it made because it just goes right in the purse. But for some of us, we have certain pockets for different things. And so I've got my key pocket, got my wallet, I've got my cell phone. And no lie, before I walk out of the house, I'm doing this bit. I'm checking each pocket. Well, one day my wife calls me. And she's on the phone with me, and I'm getting ready to walk out the door. And so I'm doing the whole thing, and so I'm talking to her like this, and I'm getting ready to walk out the door, and I lock the door, walk outside, and I do exactly what you're thinking. Keys, wallet, phone. But I can't find my phone. I don't know where my phone is. And I can't, and so Carrie Ann can clearly hear on the phone that she's sensing the anxiety, and she goes, "What is wrong?" And I go, "I've got my keys, I got my wallet, I can't find my phone anywhere." And she goes, "Dan, you're on the phone right now." Have you ever done that? Hopefully you've never done that, but maybe you've been at a place where something was right in front of you, but you couldn't see it. You didn't realize it. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Today we're going to be talking about a story that happens on Easter Sunday, the very first Easter Sunday. And many of us know the story of Easter where the women come to the tomb. I read about that earlier, where Peter comes to the tomb and he's looking around. He can't find anything. But did you know that there is another story that happens on that Easter Sunday, and it happens later in the afternoon, probably about 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We kind of get that feel. And what happens is there are two guys, and man, they've had a crazy week. Jesus has been crucified. He's been laid in the tomb. Then there's this story of Jesus being resurrected from the dead, and they just can't figure it out. And they are walking from Jerusalem to another city called Emmaus, and they're just shaking their heads and they're trying to figure everything out. And lo and behold, who should come and talk to them? And so I'm going to use my props up here to help me with the wind and get everything just right so that I can read you this passage this morning. Let me make sure I get there. I am in Luke chapter 24. If you go to Luke chapter 24, either on your phone or in your Bible, or if you're joining us and maybe you got a tablet or something like that. Let's see. There we go. Luke chapter 24. It's the exact same chapter that everything else. When the women went to the tomb, it's in that exact same chapter, just a little bit further down. And so I want you to think of that first Easter just afternoon. And listen to what happens. Now, the same day, two of them were on their way to a village called Emmaus, which was about 7 miles. And so they're going about 7 miles, and together they were discussing everything that had taken place. What were they discussing? They were discussing the crucifixion. They were discussing Jesus being resurrected and not understanding, or at least his body being stolen. That's what they thought. And so they were discussing everything. And while they were discussing, and look at this, and arguing, you ever heard men do that? Yep. Get a bunch of old men together and they'll begin to just talk and argue. And Jesus himself, listen to this, came near and began to walk along with them. But look at this, but they were prevented from recognizing them. Isn't that amazing? He's right there in front of them. They weren't even doing their man stance, looking into the fridge. He was right there in front of them, and they didn't recognize him. But they were prevented from recognizing him. Then he asked them, what is this dispute that you're having with each other as you're walking? And they stopped walking and they looked discouraged. I'm going to come back to that. One named Cleopas, so we know that these weren't his 12 disciples. One of them named Cleopas answered, are you the only visitor in Jerusalem that doesn't know the things that are happening in these days? Are you the only guy? Here you are, you're asking what's going on. Are you really the only guy? Well, he was at the very center of it. They just didn't realize it. What things? Jesus asked them. So they said to him, the things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, powerful in action and speech before God and all the people, and how over the chief priests and leaders handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we were hoping that he was the one who is going to redeem Israel. Besides all this, it's the third day since these things had happened. Isn't that good to know? There's other passages that tell us that it's the third day since all of this happened. Moreover, some women from our group astounded us. They arrived early at the tomb and they didn't find his body, and they came and reported all that they had seen this vision of angels and that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said. And then it goes on from there. It says, he said to them, how foolish you are and how slow you are to believe all that the prophets had spoken. And what Jesus does, so he's walking along with them, and what Jesus does is as they're walking down the road to Emmaus, Jesus explains to them. He picks up in the Old Testament and he explains exactly what was really happening. And then they get to the village in verse 28, and it says they came near the village where they were going, and he gave the impression that he was going farther. So imagine this. Jesus is like, oh, I'm going to keep going. And they say, no, stay with us. It's almost evening and the day is almost over. And so he went to stay with them. And it was as he reclined at the table with them, and he took the bread and he blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it to them. Now listen to this. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, but he disappeared from their sight. They said to one another, weren't our hearts burning within us while he was talking with us on the road and explaining the scriptures to us? Isn't that good? So here they are, and it wasn't until he said the blessing. I don't know if it was God is great, God is good, let us thank him for our food. But he says the blessing, he breaks the bread, and as soon as he breaks that bread, their eyes are open, and they realize this guy is Jesus himself. Now, why did I tell you that story? Because today I have entitled just a quick sermon. We're going to take some quick notes called Right in Front of You. These guys had Jesus right in front of them. They knew the story. They knew about the crucifixion. They knew about that at least his body was gone. But he was right in front of them, and they didn't recognize him. Folks, can I tell you something? Sometimes Jesus is right in front of you, and he's right in front of me. Maybe not physically, but spiritually, he's right there. And we might know all of the story, and we might know all of the things that took place, but we still don't recognize him the way that they did. And so I just want to talk about some of the things that they might have been distracted by. Number one, if you got your notes there, it says that they were distracted by disappointment. They were distracted by disappointment. There's a place in the story in verse 17 where they're looking at each other, and he comes up and he says, what happened? What happened in Jerusalem? And they go, what? You don't know what happened? And it says that they physically stopped. Can you imagine? I mean, they're not just walking along and they don't just say, did you not know what happened? It says that they physically stopped. They stopped walking. And the Bible says that they looked discouraged. They were distracted by their disappointment. Now, why do I bring that up? Because sometimes, even on Easter Sunday, we miss Jesus because we've been distracted by our disappointment. Have you ever been disappointed with God? I know I have. Have you ever been disappointed? You thought that your expectations were going this way. You thought Jesus was going to lead your life this way. And all of a sudden, your life took a U-turn, or something happened with your kids, or something happened in your job. And all of a sudden, everything just take a U-turn. And you missed Jesus. He was right in front of you, but you were distracted by the disappointments that were in your life. Maybe it's your job. Maybe a relationship didn't work out. Maybe you said to yourself, you know what, I'm going to live for Jesus. And you say, you know what, I'm really going to try. Maybe you're a teenager in here today, and you said, you know what, if everybody in my school doesn't live for Jesus, I'm going to live for Jesus. Maybe at your work, if no one lives for Jesus, I'm going to live for Jesus. And you know what you found out? You said, man, this is lonely. This is lonely. And you were distracted by your disappointment. Maybe God has led you through some major trials, and you've just been distracted by those disappointments. These guys, they were distracted by those disappointments. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking about centuries ago. Did you know people believe that the sun actually revolved around the earth? Did you know that? Many of y'all know that if you were ever in science, if you were in science class. They believed that the sun revolved around the earth. Well, let me ask you a question this morning. Does the sun revolve around the earth? No. The earth revolves around the sun. See, a lot of times what we think is that God revolves around us. We think God revolves around us, my things, my wishes, my wants, my expectations, all of those things. We think that God revolves around us. Oh, but nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, we revolve around Him. If you've ever been disappointed, don't be distracted by your disappointments. The second thing that I want you to write down, if my pages will stay up. Oh, I'm in the book of Acts now. I can preach on that later. So if we've got this, I want you to write this one down. It says that they were also distracted by the details. They were distracted by the details. So they were able to tell Jesus. They were like, what in the world? You don't know the story? You don't know what's happened over the past 3 days. You don't know about the crucifixion. You don't know about this guy named Jesus and how the whole city, has just been talking about this. You don't know about that. They were distracted by the details. And here's the thing. They knew all the facts. They knew all the facts about things that had happened. Now, they didn't know, they didn't believe yet that Jesus had risen from the dead, but they knew all the facts. But nevertheless, they didn't know Jesus. Did you know that you can know all the facts without knowing a person? You can know all the facts without knowing a person. I think about in our city, man, you throw out two names and people immediately, they know exactly who you're talking about. I'm talking about guys like Archie Manning. You pull that name out here in New Orleans, people know who you're talking about. You know who I'm talking about when I say Archie Manning? What about a guy named Drew Brees? You know who I'm talking about named Drew Brees? You know that guy? Have you ever heard of that guy? I'm sure you have. A lot of times we can know all about a person, and you might even know the facts and figures. Some of you guys have, man, I feel inadequate to hang out with some of the men here. Man, you guys know all the facts and figures about different sports players. I mean, you know yardage, you know all the things, you know how many passing yards they have, you know all of those things. But you know what? It's different knowing all the facts about someone and knowing someone. I have seen people who know every statistic on Drew Brees that there is to know. And they walk into a restaurant and there he was. And they couldn't talk to him. They were so starstruck. The words wouldn't come out of their mouth. They couldn't say a thing. See, they knew everything about him, but they didn't know him. See, what happened with these two guys is they knew everything about what had happened over the past 3 days. They knew everything about Jesus and his ministry, but they didn't know him. They were distracted by the facts. They were distracted by all those details, and nevertheless, he was right there in front of them. Sometimes we get that way. Do you know everything there is to know? Have you been in church your whole life? Have you grown up in church for a long time? Don't be distracted by all the details. Know him personally. And then the final thing, next to final thing is they were distracted by their doubt. They were distracted by their doubt. Jesus actually calls them out on this in verse 25. In verse 25, he looks at them and he says, why is it so hard for you to believe? Why in the world is this so hard for you to believe? And so he calls them out on their doubt, and then he begins to take them through the scriptures. Now, I want to talk to the kids in here today, okay? We got any kids in here? All right, if you're a kid in here, how many kids in here have ever ridden on a plane? Raise your hand if you've ever ridden on a plane. Have you ever ridden on a plane? Oh, my goodness. Oh, hands up all over the place. Okay, you can put your hands down. Do you know Pastor Dan did not ride on a plane? I was 18 years old. First plane trip I ever took was Boston, Massachusetts. Took a little mission trip with my college group. And so I had never ridden on a plane. You guys were brave. Because you know what? I was nervous. And so I was asking all these people, I said, what's it like? What's it like to ride on a plane? And they say, well, the hardest part is the takeoff and the landing. They said, and that there's turbulence and, there's all these other things. And so I was a little bit nervous. But even though I was a little bit nervous, I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get on this plane. And so you know how the drill goes. You go to the airport, you get checked in, you go through security, then you get into the waiting area, you get to the waiting area, and then they've got this little thing that, takes you to the actual airplane. But then you've got to cross the threshold of the door. And I got to the threshold of the door, and I thought, this is it. This is it. One more step, and I'm locked in. I'm committed. And so I did it. I took that step, and then someone yelled at me for not doing what was right. They said, keep going, and so I kept on going down into the plane. These guys were distracted by their doubt. It's almost as if they had gotten to the edge. They had heard all the stories of the women. They had heard how Peter went to the tomb. They had heard all these things, but they couldn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. They couldn't believe that Jesus had been resurrected from the dead. They had all these doubts. Did you know you and I, we have all these doubts too sometimes. And Jesus is looking, not for just these two guys, but looking for us to take that step and say, Jesus, I'm going to follow you all my days. Has there been a time that you've not stepped on a plane, but that you stepped and you said, Jesus, I'm going to follow you? Have you been distracted by your doubts? And then I got one last thing for you guys this morning, this Easter Sunday. The whole time, Jesus was revealing his deliverance. Jesus was revealing his deliverance. So they get to the end of the story. They've been walking to Emmaus, 7 miles. So probably an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours that they've been walking on this road to Emmaus. They get there, and Jesus is going to, he's so suave. I got to be honest, Jesus is just so suave. He gets to where they're going to kind of peel off and go home, and he gets to that area, and he's going to act like, I'm going to keep on going. I'm going to keep on going. And they said, no, the sun's getting ready to go down. We've been walking this whole time. How about you come in with us? How about you come over with us? And then they sit down, they feed him a meal, or at least they sit down to a meal. He blesses the food, he breaks bread, and then he reveals himself to them. Now, there's something interesting about this. Notice, Jesus didn't reveal himself to them until they had invited him in. Did you see that? He didn't reveal himself until they had invited him in. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a very spiritual principle there. A lot of times have you ever wanted Jesus to have a lightning bolt? You wanted Jesus to reveal himself. Jesus, show yourself to me. Show yourself. Yeah, you were resurrected from the dead, and I know all about that, but I want you to show yourself in some way right here, right now. Well, notice that's not what happened with the men. He didn't reveal himself until they had invited him in, because that's how faith works. Faith says, I'm going to invite you into my life. I believe that you, and then he begins to reveal himself to you. See, that's how Jesus works. This Easter, you might have had Jesus right in front of you. All of your fair share of disappointments and details and doubts. But you've never made him the deliverer of your soul. You'll never know who Jesus really is until you invite him in. How about we share in a word of prayer as we continue in our time of worship?